Hey guys, this is Doug, and we're talking all about Witcher the Old World, which is the brand new Kickstarter drop today. Hey guys, welcome back to Danger Planet. I'm here as always with my good friend Richard, or as we would say in the Malifaux world, I brought my friend Richard. Richard, say hello to the internet.
Hello, Internet.
So today we're talking all about, I think, a game that you and I are both really excited to have finally gotten our hands on very recently and actually played. I love this thing, so you and I kind of pretty quickly agreed we wanted to make a video on it. We're talking about The Witcher Old World, which is, as of time of recording, still being shipped out to a lot of the backers. But we were lucky enough to get it about, what, Rich, you got this thing about 2 weeks ago?
2 or 3 weeks, yes.
So I guess let's start at the beginning. Rich, why don't you give us a little bit of a context on what's the deal with this game, who's the developer behind it, and give us a little bit of background on how the Kickstarter developed out, and how everything ended up playing out.
Sure. So, The Witcher Old World was a fairly successful Kickstarter back in May of 2021, which feels like it wasn't forever ago, but it was. This thing raised a astonishing amount of money, almost 7 million euros or whatever that is in American dollars, a lot. It is from a publisher called uh, Go On Board, which I don't believe has done anything else of any real note. They're a Polish developer, but it was also backed by CD Projekt Red because of the IP of The Witcher.
Yeah, so it's got a big IP behind it, but a fairly new developer. Um, what's the background on the Kickstarter? How many stretch goals did it get? What comes in the box? What's the TLDR on that?
So they had a fairly staggering amount of stretch goals. I don't remember what their original goal was. Don't think it. Yeah, I don't remember what their original goal was, but they pretty much blasted by that. There are dozens of stretch goals that they hit, including some as big as entire expansions, all the way down to extra monsters, extra models, and extra cards.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we laid it out on the tabletop, this was a huge, huge, huge amount of models. I mean, the box itself came with what, like 30 monsters or more, maybe?
It's more than that. I think it's close to 60 miniatures, including the monsters and the player pieces.
Yeah, yeah, a ton. And it takes up a lot of space on the table. It's a very robust game. So,
Yeah.
why don't we get into a little bit of how the game plays? I mean, start at the beginning, Rich. Give us, because when I played this game, the thing that I thought was interesting about it is it felt very much like a handful of different game experiences kind of combined into one much larger game experience, right? So why don't you give us a rundown of what's the objective of the game, how many players is it, and what are the core pieces of all the different gameplay elements?
Sure. So it is a competitive game for 1 to 5 players, although there is a cooperative expansion. But the primary game mode is competitive, where you are basically it's basically a race. You're basically trying to be the first Witcher to get to a certain number of trophies. 4 trophies. The first person to get to 4 trophies wins the game, and there's various different ways of doing that. The most common way is either beating up monsters or beating up other players. The actual gameplay is quite interesting. It is kind of an amalgam of several different game types. It is, primarily exploration game. You're moving pieces around the board and exploring different locations and doing different location-based actions. And then, in addition to that, you're fighting monsters that are represented on the board with models or other players. So there's a PvP aspect as well. And then thirdly, there is a deck building aspect, because it is a deck builder to some extent, where your deck of cards, all players start with the same standard deck of cards, and throughout the game you'll add cards to it. And those cards, in addition to being how you move around the board, and how you fight, and their combat cards, they're also your hit points, because whenever you fight a monster or another player, basically when you would take damage, you discard cards, and the first person to run out of cards in their deck and hand is the loser. So it's an interesting combination of mechanics. And then of course there is also the RPG-esque mechanics of, you have stats and you can raise those stats in various ways to make yourself stronger.
Yeah, what I thought was really interesting is when you and I and Boris were testing the game, I was taking the approach of really, really trying to go deep into the RPG elements, but at the same time, I always had to keep an eye on where you were on the map because
Yeah.
I knew that you were jonesing to get into my character. Because if you kill opposing characters, it's a Veep proc, right? Effectively, um, and in the general normal game mode, the first to 4 wins, and you can get like killing other players is a big way to do that. Um, and I found myself trying to run around the board to get myself ahead of you in terms of power, and then try to choose when I wanted to engage you on the map. And what ultimately ended up happening is you and I were in a race to level up our stats. And because I had avoided you so aggressively, you went and then picked on the other player. And then we both raced to try to kill the boss monster because we were playing the expansion alternate mode, where if you, the primary win con is there's this one big monster on the map.
Yeah.
And instead of racing to get to 4 Veeps, what happens is when you level up your guy and you get like those Veep track counters, they become debuffs to the primary bad monster on the map. And
Yeah.
then the first player to kill that primary bad monster wins the game. And so what happened in one of our test games is Rich and I were both almost at max level, and then we raced one another to try to go to find the boss monster, and we just took our player turns basically getting killed by the boss monster. I died to him once, Rich died to him once, and then Rich killed him and won the game, basically, which I
Yeah.
thought was really fascinating. The other element of the gameplay mechanics that I personally really enjoyed was that when you die in combat, the game gives you resources, which I
You
thought
don't
was
you don't die. For a reference point, there's no death. You're
when you
you're
lose
you're a
combat.
witcher. Witchers can't die. You just lose, and then you learn because you're a witcher.
Right, exactly. So when you lose combat, yeah, that's a good call out. My bad. When you lose combat, instead of having a character death or something like that, you actually get some reward mechanics out of it. And it's to keep the game from spiraling into like the winning player just beats on the losing player, and
Yeah.
then it just keeps spiraling down, and that winning player just wins. So instead, what happens is they give both players a resource. The player that is beating up the other Witcher gets a Veep counter, which is very, very important, and then the other player will get, I think it's like cards effectively, or resources or stats or something, right?
Yeah, you get to draw cards. It's also important to know that you can only ever get 1 victory point per player, so you can't just beat on the same player for the whole game. You can only get 1 point per each other player.
Right. I think they've done an eloquent job designing that to prevent what I call the game spiral, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then you mentioned it already, but I thought this was really cool. The deck building mechanic, where it felt to me kind of like Ascension, I guess, is like where there's like this track of cards and you buy them, they go into your deck, and
Yeah.
then you use the cards to fight, but the cards are also your health pool. Um, Another cool mechanic that I liked was the combo mechanic, where you effectively have a couple of different colors of cards. You've got yellow, purple, green, and red. Generally, red is a finisher color. You want to chain that at the end of a combo. Purple and yellow are like mid in combo colors, and green is often a defensive card. And so
Mm.
what you're trying to do is you're trying to draft your deck in such a manner that you can string out combo punches or combo attacks onto either other player characters or monsters effectively. Um, do you know, Rich, um, did they come out with any, like, are they coming out with any additional cards to support the deck things, or is, well, when as part of the Kickstarter rewards, or was the Kickstarter rewards mostly just like monster figures?
There was a lot. So there was one expansion that added an entirely different. So there's the Mages expansion, which adds 5 completely new characters that are also play completely differently, and they actually have their own completely separate deck of cards. Um, and then they did add, the legendary monsters. They added a couple expansions that make the monster fights more difficult or different. They added an expansion that added like a whole another side of the map where you can go via boat and go to islands. And then there was just one expansion, which was literally just 200 extra cards. Like it's literally, I mean, it came with one extra playable character because it came with Ciri, and then it came with just here's 200 cards, and there's like 40 plus new action cards and like 100 plus new exploration cards.
Yeah, so I mean, you weren't joking when you said this thing hit a ton of stretch goals. When Rich and I laid it out on my table, it took up more than an entire dining room table worth of space, which was pretty cool to see.
I
Um,
spent $77 on sleeves.
which is like how many sleeves you figure? Like almost 1,000 sleeves or something like that. Crazy, probably, right?
It was probably close to 1,000 sleeves. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, so that's kind of how that's how the gameplay mechanics work, right? But I guess the other thing that I'm curious about now is, I mean, Rich, you play a lot of these types of board games, right? I would say I do too at this point because of you. Um, what are your thoughts and opinions on the game itself? Do you feel like they've done a good job reflecting the universe of The Witcher in the game? And what did you like about it? Was there anything you didn't like about it?
So from a thematic standpoint, the game is super on point. I haven't read all of the Witcher novels, so I don't know the lore as much. But like Adam, who we played with a bunch, is like super into that, and he was commenting the whole time of like how accurate things were. So from a lore standpoint, they did a real great job. You feel like a Witcher. It feels like you're doing things that a Witcher would do, and there's a lot of comedy as well, like a lot of comedic cards and stuff, and so it's really nice. The models are very high quality, and they make sense. So like sometimes these games will come out and they'll have like stretch goals where like you can have these models, but the models don't really matter because they're not really like whatever they're replacing doesn't make them enough of a difference to ever really impact the game. It's just an excuse for them to charge you more money for plastic. Whereas, when you're fighting monsters and there's a monster on the board as opposed to like a little piece of cardboard with its picture on it, that makes a big impact. And then as far as a, a lot of these big AAA, as I'll say it, like board games that have been coming out in the last few years, especially at this price point, because this was not an inexpensive Kickstarter, right? The trend has been that a lot of these have been like big campaign style games, right? And I love a campaign game as much as the next guy. But the problem is that most of us don't have like a dedicated group of friends that's going to get together every week at the same time for 2+ hours to play a game, to play the same game for 6+ months. I mean, just try and get any D&D group together and you'll understand how difficult that can be. So the fact that this is not a campaign game, but it still has the same kind of scale, it feels, while you're playing it, it feels like a campaign game, but each experience is self-contained, and so you can just show up to the game store on a weeknight and roll and set it up, and people walk in and they're like, "That game looks cool. Yeah, let's play." And it's you pop in, you play a game. It's not a short game, but not an incredibly long game either. So you can pop in, you can play a game, and then next week you can play it again with different people, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think another element that I was really pleasantly surprised around is, and for me, this was a mirror of why I love Arkham Horror, the card game, so much,
Mm.
is I was spending a lot of time looking at the map. I was trying to do the math on my character stats.
Yeah.
I was doing everything else. But as you play the game, you will be forced into narrative interactions.
Yep.
So let's say you go to level up your defensive stat. And a lot of this game is moving around the map, going to different areas where you can level up your attack, level up your defense, level up your magic. Basically, the Witcher is training himself, right? But as you go to do these objectives or to get these stat boosts, you'll encounter narrative plot points where you'll be forced to make a decision. And these decisions may not be like, this is the light side thing, this is the dark side thing. It's a lot more ambiguous than that, right? Like for example, I was on my way to upgrade my specialty one time, and I came across a deranged hermit in a little stagecoach, and he was like, like the option was like, stop and talk to the hermit or like kill him or whatever. And you
Sure.
would think that one of the options was clearly like, oh, stop and be nice. But if you were to kill him, you actually got like a bunch of other crap, which I thought was cool. And the other element is it injects forcibly a bit of role play into what is otherwise a fairly technical game, which is something that I really appreciated, basically. So I don't know how
Yeah.
you feel about that element of it. I thought they did that element very, very well. And I'm assuming that's part of what Adam was enamored with
Yeah.
and when he had countered it. He was probably like, oh man, I like they did such a good job talking about XYZ scenario. Like this really mirrors what happens in either the show or the books, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I actually really like is that uh I've played a lot of deck builders, and generally I don't really like deck builders, but I think one of the things that they do in this game that is interesting is that in most deck builders, you are rewarded by, trashing getting rid of the generally terrible starting cards and just streamlining your deck and making it really efficient so that you draw the same cards every turn, you do the same stupid bullshit combos every turn. But if you try and do this in this game, you're just going to die because the deck is also your hit points, and at the higher levels the monsters are doing a lot of damage to you, so it doesn't really matter if you draw the perfect starting hand and pull off a ridiculous 15 damage combo if it doesn't kill the monster and then they wipe you out in one go.
It's really funny that you mentioned that, Richard, because me, myself, and I actually did exactly that thing. And
Yep.
I went
And
into
you
the
lost.
fight. Yeah, dude, I went into the fight with the boss monster, and I was like, my deck is so efficient. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to cycle through. I know exactly how I'm going to get these big combos. And
And it's gone.
yeah, exactly, right? So I got like a bunch of good hits in, and then 2 rounds of combat in with the big baddie, the boss monster. He killed me because my deck had been narrowed down to the point for like peak efficiency, and I didn't think of the fact that my deck is my health points, and I have 18 of them now, and this boss monster is hitting me for 6 to 7 damage every swing, right?
Yeah,
So
and then like the next turn I think I ended up winning the game with a single card left in my hand.
right, exactly.
So it was like one hit point was the difference.
Right, because you failed by 1 hit point the first time, and then you
Yep.
got them by 1 hit point the second time, which is cool. The
Yep.
other thing that I think is really fun is when a player is fighting like a boss or a monster, one of the other players gets to control that monster. Now, you're not making necessarily a ton of decisions, but I will tell you, there's something very satisfying about Rich trying to kill the big baddie and then me flipping damage into him and be like, "Sit down, Mr. Witcher. You're about to take 7 damage," which is like really fun.
You
So.
also get to bet if there's multiple, if you're playing more than 2 players, all of the players not participating in the fight can place bets on who they think is going to win.
Yeah, which you can bet your bottom dollar that I was doing literally every fight. It was great. I was always throwing in coin to bet on stuff. It was great. I had a lot of fun about that, and I think that speaks to the design of the game, where they've done a good job with a fairly large open world, multi-tenant, complex board state game. But then they've had a really good sense of humor and a
Yeah.
really good narrative sense of direction
Yeah.
about it. And I think all of those things combined kind of for me produces these type of really complex board game that I'd like to see more of. I think you're right, Rich. I don't want to see as much massive campaign board games that require 4 friends to meet for half a year to complete, because the reality of the situation, at least for us at Danger Planet, like for me, for Rich, for Brandon, for Sam, we play so many game systems. We play so many board game systems. We play so many tabletop skirmish systems that I'm not. I don't have time to. I would never complete this game otherwise. But because it is, I would say, episodic, really, right? Like each individual playthrough is kind of its own experience.
Yeah.
It's something that Rich and I could play one week with 2 of our friends, and then play another game a month later, and still have a very different experience, but not feel like we're not really ever making progress with the game, right? The intention of the game is each individual playthrough is a very unique narrative experience, and you don't have to set up a whole campaign to get value out of it. That's
Yeah,
at least my thought.
it's the question of, you can have a campaign game that claims to have 60 plus hours of content, and it probably does. You sat down and you could probably get 60 hours of replay value out of that game, which for a couple $100 is not a bad deal. But if you play the game once a month or once every 2 months because it's so hard to get onto the table, you're not getting that replay value versus a game like this where if you play it once or a couple times a month, but you keep playing it every month, you're going to end up with more playtime and more replay value from what is ostensibly a shorter game than you would from like a much larger 60+ hour campaign game.
And it's
and
definitely
more people will get to play.
right. And it's a board game that I think you actually mentioned this a little earlier, so I'm stealing this from you a little bit, but it's definitely a board game that you could go to your LGS on like whatever your gaming night is, and
Yeah.
you could set it up and you just wait like a Venus flytrap of awesomeness. And
Yeah.
you're like, come on over here and play some Witcher. And it's
It-
really not that bad. Like
It
you could
has
keep
such a
the
good
game-
board presence, and it's a known IP that if you just set this up on the board and you put the box next to it, people are gonna walk over and be like, "Ooh, what's this? Piece of candy? Let's play."
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how you make friends, Doug.
Oh, okay. That's why I don't have any friends other than you. That makes sense.
It's
Okay.
true, yeah.
I've been doing it wrong this whole time, apparently.
Well,
All right. Well, I mean, I think for closing thoughts for me, if I had any closing thoughts on this game, I would say really good execution of the IP, really beautiful miniatures, offers a complex board state, but not so much that the learning curve is crazy. I think the rules are fairly intuitive.
Yeah.
And I think they can be enjoyed as a episodic or every so often experience. And because of that, to get value out of the game is a lot easier than trying to grind a campaign for continuous interaction. Rich said it, and I agree with it. Try to be a DM and try to organize a weekly game of Dungeons and Dragons and see how easy that is. Right? It's a skill to be able to maintain something like that, which is why Rich and I are going to favor probably most of the time these types of games that we can jump into and out of, but still offer us a really complex gameplay experience with a really strong narrative and execution element. I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents on this. What are your close it out for us here, Mr. Richard? Tell the internet. Any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good game. I think it's I don't know what it's going to cost in retail, but I imagine it will be a decent value. And I think there's a lot of replay value, and I think there's a lot of options for expansions. And I think that I will keep an eye on this publisher and see what their next game is, and it'll probably be worth, keeping an eye out. So,
yeah, I agree. All right. Well, there's only one last thing to do. Say goodbye to the internet, Richard.
bye.
Goodbye, internet. We'll come annoy you again later.